There are big issues with two by two ministers who would like to leave the ministry or are being forced to leave the ministry. As most people who are involved with two by twos know, that these ministers have no assets of any kind. They have no car, they have no home, they have no savings. So transitioning out of two by two ministry is extremely difficult in terms of having money or just even accoutrements to support oneself, even for one day. Generally, you move from having homes to stay in, people feeding you, and cars to drive, to being completely homeless in a real sense. The other issue is you spent time in a two by two ministry. Maybe it's a year, maybe it's 5, maybe it's 15 years or more, and you do not have any work experience that you can put on a resume or a CV. What are you going to say? Who did you work for? There's no legitimate organization you work for. What skills did you learn? What training did you get? Like, there's really nothing you can say. It's basically completely lost years. Now, you may believe that you have gained some kinds of skills about, I don't know, listening to people or who knows, but in actual fact, there's very little skills you picked up. What's really bad is that what you think is your primary skill, which is preaching the gospel. Unfortunately, that's not your primary skill, because if you contrast your ability to preach the gospel with folks in legitimate churches, you don't know how to preach the gospel because you've never been trained what the gospel is. You have a very, very confused idea of what the gospel is. So you can't even transition easily to become a pastor of another church. So it's a very difficult transition for people who are leaving the two by two ministry. And this is why many of them stay. They're essentially locked into as a form of slavery. Now, so how do you transition out? Either you're forced out or you made this choice, but how does it happen? Well, the first thing is to make sure that you're not homeless, right? So if you have your parents that you can go and live with, or if you have a friend who will let you stay in their home, that's the first order of business, and that's fantastic because that takes a huge amount of the financial cost off of you. Right? Housing is always the most expensive thing, and to have housing is it also takes an enormous amount of stress out of you. So even if the situation with the people you're living in, whether it be parents or friends, is not great, even if you have to live on an uncomfortable bed or whatever the issue is, it's better than sleeping under a park bench in the street. Okay? So you have a roof over your head. That's the first thing. So the next thing is food, right? So obviously, if you're in one of these homes, they're probably going to feed you. They may have some kind of you may have to actually feed yourself, and in that case, you might need to get some money, right, in order to buy food. Now, there are jobs for totally unskilled people, minimum wage jobs, where they're preparing food in a restaurant or a deli or whatever, or it's manual labor. These jobs exist, and that's what you're going to have to do, even if it's cleaning toilets, a cleaning person, right? You can do these sorts of jobs. There's nothing precluding you from those types of jobs to earn some money for food. Now, keep in mind, this is all going to be temporary, but it's just to get yourself, um, get some say legs under you. Okay. So the next order of business after you've got food and shelter is, of course, you're going to need clothes, right? Well, again, with um, with your small little job, you can buy some clothes. There's lots of used clothing stores, um, places you can get. Again, we're just trying to survive here. We're not trying to move you from being two by two minister into corporate executive in one fell swoop, because you don't deserve that. You don't have those skills. You're going to have to start from the bottom. and that's just what you have to accept. But if you do you do it with the correct game plan, you can make it happen quickly. So the next step after this, after you got your shelter, your food, and your clothing dealt with, is to figure out what are you going to do with your life? What sort of career are you going to embark upon? Now, most people are going to suggest you embark on a secular career, right? And of course, coming out of 2x2s, that's probably what you think. There is nothing else to do but secular jobs. Unfortunately, I don't think that's the best solution for you because you likely believe you had a calling to preach the gospel. And so to have that calling stripped away from you is pretty traumatic for you. So why don't you just continue to preach the gospel, but in a different institution, right? That would be much more effective for you. It's something that you love to do, and it's if you just had proper training and put in a proper institution, you could excel at this. So here's where the most important step is, and that is to get yourself essentially um, transition your 2x2 mindset of what you think the gospel is into actual what Christianity actually is. So this is the key issue. Now, if you're staying in the home of someone who's an atheist, that's probably not going to be helpful. You mean again, you stay in the home of the people who provide you housing. That's a given, but you probably want to be with someone who's Christian if at all possible. And the thing is, you don't want to be in the home of someone who's a type of Christian that's not going to be helpful in types of you learning about Christianity. Again, you take with what you get where you're going to live, but we're talking about ideal situations at the moment. And what am I trying to get at here in a roundabout way? That is that if you're in a 2x2, you're in an exclusivist, fundamentalist, anti-liturgical sect. It's also highly anti-Catholic. And so by the order of that, what you think are possible avenues of employment to go down in as a minister or a pastor are closed to you because you are already in such a let's say minor position of your thinking, right? So if you're anti-Catholic, well, that cuts off 50% of the world's Christians from your solution set. If you're anti-liturgical, that's another 25%. So now you're 75% of Christianity is cut off from you. If you're fundamentalist, that's big. Now you're at probably 95% of all Christians are outside of your wheelhouse, right? So what I'm trying to point out is if you move from being a 2x2 to not being exclusivist, you're still locking yourself out of all these other potential solution sets. So that's why the transition from worker to becoming regular is mostly focused on dealing with this transition of your mind where you move from being exclusivist to non-exclusivist, from being fundamentalist to non-fundamentalist, and from being anti-liturgical to accepting of liturgical, and then finally to remove this anti-Catholicism or anti-Orthodox block in your mind. Once all of those are open, then your career set potentials open dramatically, right? Remember, you're a celibate minister in a 2x2s. Well, where else are there celibate ministers? Well, it turns out that Roman Catholicism is one of the only ones that has celibate ministers. Whether you're a priest, Roman Catholic priest, or you're in the religious orders, nuns or Franciscan friars or so forth. So that's an opportunity set for you, but you have to get over your anti-Catholicism. Well, also, if you can't get over your fundamentalism problem, you're a huge amount of pastoral churches that you could work in is closed to you. Right? You can't be an Anglican minister. You couldn't be a Presbyterian minister, so on and so forth. So this is why the transition is so important to focus on your understanding of Christianity at this point, to get yourself educated properly. because that opens up your career set very differently. Now, let's just assume that you're able to go through that process, and what's your potential career set? Well, just being a pastor at your Anglican or Presbyterian or Methodist or United Church of Canada or um, even some forms of Baptist churches, you can do that all by going to a Bible college or seminary. Because there's ones called kind of union seminaries where it's almost denominational agnostic in the sense it doesn't matter which denomination. You just kind of get a general Christian understanding. And then a lot of these denominations, for career-wise, open up to you. And then you can, in all the ones I mentioned, you can have a spouse if you want, and they hire both male and female pastors. So this is all an option for you. You can have children, in fact. Now, if you say, no, I really like the celibate life, well, the other option for you is to go into the Roman Catholic solution. And again, if you're a male, you can become a priest. If you're a female, you can become a deacon. There are female deacons. But more importantly, there's a huge amount of religious orders in the Roman Catholic Church, open to both males and females, right? So we're talking about Franciscans, Benedictines, Augustinians, Salesians, so forth. We mean like nuns or monks. That's not really a good words to talk about it. It's called sisters and brothers is what they usually use these words because um, nuns and monks are stuck in the convent. They're not really out in the world, but sisters and brothers in these religious orders are out in the world. So Franciscan brothers, which is I think one of the largest religious orders of Franciscans, they're out in the world they're teaching, they're working in hospital or medical environment, and all kinds of other ministries. So there's huge opportunity for you if you put yourself into one of these religious orders with the Catholic Church. And you're going to be around like-minded people in terms of what they're wanting to do with their lives in terms of ministry, which is basically what you've been wanting to do in the 2x2 ministry, right? And they train you in how to be celibate, like how to deal with all the issues of your sexual drive and how to redirect them. You're in a community that reinforces all of the things that you want in your life. But I think my best say suggestion to people who are trying to transition from 2x2 minister to something else is to seriously consider Roman Catholic religious order. As in terms of lifestyle, it's going to be the most similar to what you're involved in currently, aside from the fact that you just have to get over this anti-Catholic hurdle that's in your mind. Now, you may say, well, those Catholics, they do all those X, Y, and Z things that I disagree with. They're worshiping Mary and stuff. I can assure you that almost every critique you have of Roman Catholicism is a straw man argument. You actually have prescribed to them things which are not true, or you have misunderstood things about them. You see things and you think something's going on when it's not. So this is something to heavily investigate, and I think it'll be very helpful for you. Now, let's say, for example, you say, no, I don't want to go into life of ministry or religious orders. I want to go into the secular world. Okay, well, it's possible you can get a career without any further training. It probably won't pay well in the long run, but maybe you'll find somebody to get trained on the job. It's possible. Maybe something working in an old folks home, taking care of people like that or something like that. I mean, but it's probably better for you to get some training under your belt so you can increase your salary. And for that, you want to be near some sort of training institute, whether it's a university, college, or something. And you remember in the United States, these state colleges and state universities, they have much cheaper tuition if you're a resident of that state. So you want to be a resident. So that means you're going to have to spend a minimum of a year living in the state before you qualify for resident tuition. And you want to live near where these colleges are, universities. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about who you could live with, who you could stay with, and in what state and so forth. You want to get near it. Now I'm going to tell you that Florida has actually one of the cheapest in-state tuitions at the University of Florida and the State University of Florida. So I think it's in Tallahassee or Jacksonville. Jacksonville is where one of the universities is, and if you can get around that area living that for a year to get yourself then able to get Florida state tuition, resident tuition, that's very helpful. So keep that in mind. Um, the other issue that people who are transitioning from 2x2 ministry to out of the ministry have to deal with is usually some kind of trauma about the working conditions of the 2x2 minister. Many of them have been traumatized by some form of abuse, right? This could have been just abusive companion, abusive overseers. I mean, just the lifestyle itself can be abusive in some regards. And these are things that you're going to really have to work out with a therapist and on your own. Really, you're going to have to read some books about spiritual abuse and understand what they've done to you. The, the the idea that somehow some outside force is going to help you, get rid of this trauma doesn't usually happen. Even with regards to a therapist, are there to kind of prompt you along the path of recovery, but you are going to do the recovery yourself. Okay, so this is an important thing, and so you can actually do a lot of the recovery yourself just by reading books about the matter. And you don't actually need a therapist. So for some people, it's more helpful to talk to someone about it. Um, but getting yourself inside a another institution that has a lot of social network in it. That's why I'm mentioning these religious orders in the Catholic Church. That will actually help you over the trauma because the the things which you associate with the trauma, triggers, you're going to be exposed to some of those in the religious institution because it's religious, um, but they will be in a positive way. So basically that's how people overcome triggers, right? You get exposed to the trigger with a positive influence, and it no longer is a trigger for you anymore. So that's something to keep in mind. Uh, there's all kinds of resources that are going to be available to you for basically to transition you into the regular lifestyle, so to speak, get away from the ministry. But most of them are going to be things you're going to have to do on your own. And really, more than financial resources or anything, is what's most important is to have a proper game plan, to have this thought out well enough that it can be executed in a short amount of time so that you can get it up and rolling quickly. The idea that somehow we just throw money at the situation, that's not going to solve anything. It's really about a game plan. I hope that's helpful. And if you need any information, you can contact us.